Settling in for week 8 of NFL football. All 32 teams played this week. I don't know why the schedule ended up like that. Nothing but positives moving into this week, I'm sure. Let's look back at our week 7 record.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. 5-8. Not good. That brings our overall record to 64-42. And to be 100% honest, I can live with the Bills pick. Pick the Bills to beat the Patriots. I think that was probably the vast majority of America's picks. The Patriots end up winning that game. I picked the 49ers to beat the Vikings. The Vikings pull that one off. I think that was a fine pick as well. And even the Raiders to beat the Bears. I did think that they were going to start Aiden O'Connell. They started Hoyer. He did not look good at all in that game. And the Bears ended up winning pretty comfortably. But I feel like the Dolphins pick was dumb. I honestly think the Lions pick was dumb. Looking back, I think the Ravens were the obvious choice there. And I really think the Giants win should have been predictable. They look good against the Bills, who again lost to the Patriots, but they kind of have something going with Tyrod Taylor. Hindsight is always 20/20. Let's talk about some more important things from week 7 beyond my record in picks. I thought the Browns beating the Colts, and it was 39-38. It was an absurd game. Myles Garrett went off. He had a blocked field goal, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. It was the difference in that game, a 1-point game that ultimately came down to a couple of, I'll call them ticky-tack calls. They got the Browns down to the 1-yard line. They score on 4th and goal, win the game over the Colts. The way that they've rallied around PJ Walker when he's in there, they just look different on offense than when Deshaun Watson's playing. And it certainly doesn't help that Deshaun Watson threw 2 pretty ugly interceptions early in that game. Shoulder injury or not, that was not good. And then, of course, he goes out. Apparently was cleared to come back in. Stefanski keeps him out. It's a weird situation there in Cleveland. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is the Browns are 4-2. Should very easily be 5-1. There is no way the Steelers should have beat them. They were down in the 4th quarter, had -7 yards of offense, and they get a strip sack fumble, defensive touchdown, ultimately win the game. So you gotta wonder if the Browns should consider trading for a quarterback here before the trade deadline and trying to make a run at this. They have an elite level defense and they've got skill players on offense even with Nick Chubb being hurt. But at the same time, that kind of undermines the Watson contract. It's a really interesting situation that I'm definitely going to be keeping my eyes on. Now, I mentioned the Patriots and the Bills game. I don't even know what to think about it. Was that the Patriots showing they can actually play NFL competent football? Was that the Bills showing that they're kind of starting to border on dysfunction as of late? Was it just divisional games sometimes end up being weird? Really hard to say. I think there was a little bit of all that in there. And I gotta say, I'm a little worried about the Bills. That is just not what you expect for a couple of weeks in a row now. And finally, I think probably what everybody expected after they faced off in the Super Bowl last year, the Eagles and the Chiefs are starting to separate. With the 49ers loss to the Vikings, with the Bills and the Dolphins losing this week, the Chiefs just kind of slowly coasting towards that number 1 seed. I wouldn't be shocked if they're back there again. Gonna be an interesting playoff race and race for the number 1 seed, really in both divisions. But right now, the 2 Super Bowl teams from last year are in the driver's seats once again. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into our Week 8 picks, and that starts with Thursday Night Football. The Buccaneers visiting those Bills that we just talked about. Despite the fact that I feel like the Bills are maybe kind of starting to teeter towards a complete meltdown, the Buccaneers, after starting so strong, I just haven't liked what I've seen the last couple of weeks. Now, the Bills defense may not put up as big of a fight as they otherwise could. That Matt Milano injury is a big deal for them. He's on IR, he's out for the season. That's definitely not a good situation for the Bills. And they're missing far more pieces than that. Tre'Davious White's another major one. Despite all that, I think they're going to find a way to bounce back here. After losing to the Jags in London, playing pretty ugly against the Giants, and then losing to the Patriots, you gotta think at home here in front of their home crowd, they're gonna find a way to beat the Buccaneers and go to 5-3, still with everything more or less in front of them. But if they lose this one, even with the Dolphins losing last week, I just think they make it really tough on themselves to have a chance at winning that division. I think they know that. I think they find a way to get a win tonight on Thursday Night Football. Moving to the Battle of New York, or more accurately, the Battle of New Jersey. The Jets taking on the Giants. There is no true home or away team here. Technically, the Giants are the home team, but they play in the same stadium. Certainly that gives the Jets a little bit of, not an advantage, but an advantage over a typical away game. The Giants, as I said, they have been actually playing much better football since Tyrod Taylor got in there. There were all those injuries against the Bills. I thought that was going to be an absolute throttling. And the coaching staff kind of stepped up to the plate. You see this so often. When a backup quarterback goes in, it just seems like the coaching staff goes above and beyond. And if they would do that on a consistent basis, it could be a very different story for the entire team. The Jets, coming off a bye, prior to that huge win against the Eagles, I think well rested. Despite the fact that the Giants have played so well, I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets kind of go down early. Slow start versus a team that's just been playing hard. But I think with that rest, I think with their elite defense and the fact that they've been getting a little more out of Zach Wilson, I think they scheme up a couple of things during the bye week. I think the Jets get the win here, but I think this will be a close game, especially if the Giants coaching staff keeps up doing what they've been doing. The Jaguars travel to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. This could be an interesting game in that 1 o'clock Eastern kickoff window. Historically, the Steelers do not play well against the Jaguars. They did win their last matchup, but the last time this took place in Pittsburgh was that wild playoff game. The Jags got up big, ended up being 45-42. The Steelers actually scored with 1 second left to make it 45-42. It should have been probably worse than that. And as I said, just for the most part, they don't tend to play them well. The Jags are winners of 4 straight. They seem to be really getting things rolling here in this season, and it certainly did help that they had 2 games in London. They were able to stay there for the Bills game, but even despite that, they have just been playing solid football. Some mistakes against the Bills, no doubt. That game could have been a lot more lopsided than it was. I think they turned it over twice in the red zone. Gotta imagine they cleaned stuff like that up, and it looked like they had cleaned stuff like that up against the Saints until the second half of that game. The Saints come roaring back. Really, we're a drop touchdown pass away from potentially tying or maybe going for 2 and winning that game. The Steelers are just the most absurd 4-2 team maybe that I've ever seen. They have been outgained by 600 yards of offense, and yet they're 4-2. Their 2 losses have been to the 49ers and the Texans, kind of same scheme, same regime. DeMeco Ryans coming from the Kyle Shanahan tree, by 23 and 24 points. If they can keep it close, they typically find a way to win at the end. The defense steps up, makes a play. Kenny Pickett seems like he is at his best in those 2 or 4 minute drives at the end of games. I'm just not sure they can keep this one close. I think Doug Peterson is going to be able to find a way to get enough offense out of the Jags. He has been historically an aggressive head coach on things like 4th and 1, 4th and 2. I imagine he's going to go for a lot of those because he knows they have to get up and build a big lead so this doesn't end up being a close game that the Steelers somehow pull out because they just do that. I'm going to pick the Jags in this one. I can see the Steelers winning it for sure, but I just think they're going to build an insurmountable lead, and it'll probably turn into another one of those 3-score losses. A rematch from a really good game a couple of weeks back, Eagles visiting the Commanders. In that prior game this year, the Commanders scored on the final play of the game, kicked the extra point, decided to go to overtime, ended up ultimately losing that game in overtime. I felt then, and I still feel now, they should have gone for 2. Their season may look very different if they were able to do that and punch that in and get the win. I think in this case, though, even though they're the home team, it's just going to be too much. The Eagles, as I said, they're battle-tested now. They do have that 1 loss to the Jets. I think that was a reality check. I think that Dolphins win proved a lot to themselves, and I think they're just going to go into Washington and impose their will on this team. The Commanders kind of feel like they're reeling to me. They can't seem to get anything going consistently. Sam Howell's on pace to shatter the single-season sack record. They could do that without the 17th game, by the way. Of course, the record was set back in 2000. 16-game season then. I think a 16-game season now, if Howell plays every snap, he may end up breaking it. He holds on the ball too long. This isn't a defensive line you want to do that against. I think the Eagles win fairly comfortably. Divisional game probably ends up close, at least for a while, but I think the Eagles win and pretty much have it put away midway through the 4th. Rams visiting the Cowboys. This almost could have been Brett Maher taking on his prior team. However, the Rams did just release him after missing 2 field goals and an extra point against the Steelers. By the way, a 7-point loss, 7 points of missed kicks. Both field goals were 50+. The extra point, not so much. this could be a game where the Cowboys really miss Trayvon Diggs. Not saying that I expect them to lose this game, I am picking the Cowboys to win, but we saw last week against the Steelers, they were able to more or less shut down Cooper Kupp. Puka Nacua absolutely went off, and having two shutdown corners, Gilmore and Diggs, certainly would help here. I think one of those two receivers, probably Puka Nacua, again, is going to have a big day, and Cooper Kupp's going to get his. But I just think the Cowboys and their offense are going to be too much. The Rams defense, while they've had their moments, they definitely have some holes. I think the Cowboys are going to be able to fairly consistently move the ball. Red zone struggles haven't exactly been solved yet, so maybe this is a good week to work on things like that. The Steelers were able to put up 3 touchdowns on 3 red zone trips against the Rams. I only bring that up because the Steelers aren't exactly a good red zone team either, so maybe Dallas gets a little bit of that solved. I think they win this one and move to 5-2. That was like my most big brain moment in Madden, by the way. Had to do an encroachment just to get the guy to stop running hurry up every play, give a goal line look, and then pick 6 with Sean Taylor. Anyway, Vikings visiting the Packers. The Vikings are coming off quite possibly the biggest win in the last 5 years for that team, and the Packers are coming off another loss, and a loss to the Broncos. That's just not a phrase that you want to hear about your team in 2023. I've mentioned time and time again, there are things I like about Jordan Love's game. His willingness to throw deep, I think, is something to build on. A lot of times, young quarterbacks, and he has been in the league for a while, but young in terms of his experience. A lot of times young quarterbacks get gun-shy, afraid to throw in interceptions, and just want to check down, make one read, and either run or throw away. He's willing to go down the field. I like that about him. But there just hasn't been enough there out of that offense. And the Vikings, they gotta be feeling good. They beat the 49ers. They're 3-4 right now. They have a chance to go to 500. They have a chance to go into their biggest rival's house and get a win there at Lambeau. I like the Vikings to do just that. Kirk Cousins, maybe that was his best game ever. I'd have to go back through and look. He's had some big wins. That big comeback in Washington, I think that's still Washington's biggest comeback ever. Do you like that game? I think Kirk Cousins is going to like this a lot this week. I think the Vikings get the win. A battle of two teams who love to run the football. The Falcons visiting the Titans. Arthur Smith, of course, was the offensive coordinator of the Titans prior to becoming the Falcons head coach. I think that's an interesting little wrinkle in this one. Another interesting wrinkle, Will Levis is being prepped to start this game. Ryan Tannehill is injured. The report is that both Malik Willis and Will Levis are going to play, but Levis is expected to get the majority of the playing time. That's not exactly something that bodes well for the Titans going against what is a good Falcons defense. I do have to wonder about the whole Bijan Robinson thing. The report was he was just simply not feeling well, and that's the information we have. That's the information we'll have to go with. Definitely not great that he got next to no touches in last week's game. They still won, but that was definitely a little bit concerning. Assuming that he's going to play, and maybe even assuming that he doesn't play, we're going to go with the Falcons in this one. I just don't like Tennessee's chances starting a first-time starter quarterback in Will Levis. Malik Willis, when he's played, he's shown flashes of talent, not a lot of flashes of elite NFL quarterback level play. So neither team here is going to have a great quarterback. I just like the Falcons' overall roster better. And really, I was going to say I like the Titans' head coaching situation better. Mike Vrabel has done a really good job there, but quite frankly, Arthur Smith has done a lot there in Atlanta with some less than talent. Definitely, I would say, overachieved, generally speaking, and now they have a little bit more talent. So, definitely going with the Falcons here, and just wanted to give Arthur Smith his due. He has done a solid job for what they have. If they can get some quarterback play, they could be an interesting team. I really like what the Falcons have done. They're 4-3. I think they go to 5-3 this week. Moving on to an interesting AFC East divisional matchup, the Patriots visiting the Dolphins. The Patriots were just able to go into Buffalo and beat the Bills there at Orchard Park. And of course, the Dolphins coming off a tough loss to the Eagles. That game was a little closer than the 31-17 final score would make it appear to be, but all in all, I just like the Dolphins roster better, despite the fact that they're coming off a loss, the Patriots are coming off a win. Beyond that, I don't know that the Patriots have shown anything this year, and to be fair, I mentioned this at the beginning, the Dolphins' wins have not been against exactly elite level teams. The Patriots, according to their record, are not elite at all. I do think they're better than the record shows. However, I like the Dolphins to sweep the Patriots this year. They won their prior matchup. It took a blocked field goal to keep that even a one-score game. I don't think this one ends up being a one-score game. In Miami, bounce back week, I think the Dolphins win by double digits. There are some interesting games this week. Tough ones to pick. Saints visiting the Colts is another example of exactly that. The Saints last week looked lifeless for 3 quarters against the Jags, suddenly make a ferocious 15-point comeback, and as I said, end up with a basically drop touchdown pass that could have tied or won the game. The Colts, on the other hand, had a chance to beat the Browns, despite the fact that both teams were playing backup quarterbacks, at least after Deshaun Watson got hurt, and despite the fact that it was a really high-scoring game. In really any game this year, if you were to say the Colts opponent's going to score, let's say 35 points, you would imagine the Colts are going to lose that game. The Colts were able to put up 38. Unfortunately for them, the Browns put up 39. I think this one is just going to come down to home field advantage. I'm going to go with the Colts in Indy. And I think they have to be, despite the fact that they lost, they have to be feeling good about the fact that they were able to muster that much offensive output against a good defensive team. Limit the mistakes, limit the sack fumbles, limit the block field goals. They win that game against the Browns. I think they get back to fundamentals this week against the Saints, do exactly that, and get the win. Not sure I love the situation either of Chris Olave getting arrested for reckless driving, and then there was the hot mic from the Jags being mic'd up, of Carr yelling at Olave to continue running that route. There's a lot going on around the Saints right now, and 2 teams that I think on the field are pretty close. I just like the Colts situation better, home field and all. Gonna go with the Colts to get the win and send the Saints to 3-5. And finally, the last game in the 1 o'clock Eastern kickoff window, that window is going to be packed full of football. The Texans taking on the Panthers, the number 1 and number 2 overall picks. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud going head-to-head for the first time. The Panthers are 0-6. It has not been good in Carolina. Not a lot to really, hang your hat on right now if you're in Carolina either. The Texans, on the other hand, coming off a bye, they're 3-3, and CJ Stroud has looked like the real deal. I like exactly that situation to play out here. The Texans and DeMeco Ryans have already outperformed expectations here in 2023. I think, looking across the field, looking at Bryce Young, CJ Stroud no doubt wanted to go number 1 overall. Whether he would have preferred to play for the Panthers or the Texans, that's another conversation, but everybody wants to go number 1 overall. There's a lot of endorsement deals, there's more money involved, the whole situation. No doubt, there's a little bit of rivalry, whether they're going to talk about it or not, between Stroud and Young, and I just like what the Texans have done so much better. Without a win, it's hard to gauge where the Panthers are going to be in this game, but the Texans off a bye, I like them to just pick up where they left off, go above 500, getting to 4-3. They could really make some noise in that AFC South still. That division race is far from over. So into the 4 o'clock window we go. Browns taking on the Seahawks at 4:05 Eastern kickoff. The Deshaun Watson injury situation is still a bit of a mystery. He is still considered day-to-day at this point. Stefanski said he would start absent a setback, and I'm not sure if that's good or bad for the Browns. I mentioned that earlier. I do like what the Seahawks and Geno Smith have done. They've had their own red zone struggles, but generally speaking, they are just finding ways to win games. That Cardinals game, they made a bunch of mistakes to keep the Cardinals in it to begin with, still won by 10. And, if nothing else, this just feels like a Pete Carroll kind of game. Run the ball, keep it close. Geno Smith and potentially the Seahawks defense makes enough plays to ultimately pull out the win. I really do like the way the Browns defense has played, and of course their offense showed up in a big way last week. They may be in for a bit of a letdown. The Seahawks have been a good team. I like their chances of winning this one. Now the Bengals taking on the 49ers at 4:25 Eastern kickoff. This one has an interesting wrinkle in that Brock Purdy may be in serious jeopardy of missing the game. He's in the concussion protocol right now. If he can't go, it's going to be Sam Darnold for the 49ers. I could see this going one of two ways. I'm going to pick the Bengals. I'll say that first and foremost. They're coming off a bye. Joe Burrow is going to be as healthy as he's been all year, and they were only starting to get things kind of going in week 6. I think with that extra rest, I think with that extra healing for his calf, they're going to be able to get enough offensive output, especially seeing what Kirk Cousins and the Vikings and, frankly, even what PJ Walker and the Browns were able to do against that 49ers defense to be able to muster a win. I mentioned earlier with the Giants, sometimes when a backup quarterback plays, the coaching staff just really puts in those extra hours, really gets extra creative, and finds ways to scheme guys open. But I think in this case, Kyle Shanahan already does that in his base offense, whether it's Purdy, whether it was Garoppolo. He's one of the best at scheming guys open to begin with, so I'm not sure that changes his approach, and I don't think that gives Sam Darnold much of an advantage compared to, maybe like that PJ Walker situation or the Tyrod Taylor situation in New York. Gonna go with the Bengals to win this one. I feel like Joe Burrow is going to be able to get enough out of that offense, even against a good defense that no doubt is going to want to bounce back and play a little bit better. Another quick turnaround divisional matchup this week. Chiefs taking on the Broncos. Patrick Mahomes has never lost to the Broncos, which is an absurd stat. Divisional games are so unpredictable, typically so close. For that to be the case really shows not only dominance of one player, but the dominance of a team. The Broncos are coming off that win against the Packers, and the Chiefs are coming off I don't want to say comfortable win against the Chargers. That game was close until it wasn't, but the Chargers and the Broncos are just not in the same class offensively. The Broncos defense has looked a little better as of late, and they looked good when they played the Chiefs last time. I just like Patrick Mahomes to make enough plays to get the win. Russell Wilson is playing a little bit better, but Mahomes threw for 305 yards in the first half last week. I just think the Chiefs are starting to get things rolling on offense. Interested to see if they trade for a receiver here before the trade deadline. I think regardless though, they get the win on the road here in Denver. Ravens visiting the Cardinals. I'm not sure there's a lot to talk about here. The Cardinals are 1-5. A scrappy 1-5 no doubt, but 1-5 nonetheless. And the Ravens are coming off a 38-6 shellacking of the then 5-1 Lions. Maybe the biggest story of the game is Hollywood Brown playing his former team, obviously with the Cardinals now, former Raven. I just don't think this one's going to be particularly close. I like what the Cardinals are doing. I think their next couple of years look bright. I don't think this year is going to amount to all that much. I think the Ravens win this one easily. Moving on to Sunday Night Football, the Bears taking on the Chargers in LA. Justin Fields is still slated to miss this game with that thumb injury. Tyson Bagent looks solid in replacement of Fields, and again, this is that same situation where it just feels like the Bears' offensive coaching staff is scheming up better things for Tyson Bagent than they do with Justin Fields. Regardless, even though the Chargers are the Chargers, and I say it every week, they find a way to just do something to lose games, I think they are able to get back in the win column here. They're playing a Bears team that has to be feeling good after beating the Raiders and beating them soundly last week, but they have to bounce back. Brandon Staley, I think every week, more and more is coaching for his job with every loss, and no doubt he wants to keep that job. I think against a team that they should beat, against a team that they're expected to beat, they have to go out there and do just that, or he may be fired this week. I like the Chargers to win this one, if for no other reason, pure desperation. And finally, Monday Night Football, the Raiders traveling to Detroit to take on the Lions. I really think the Lions are simply going to bounce back here. There remains a bit of an uncertainty around Jimmy Garoppolo's status for this week. I think I would pick the Lions either way, but especially if Garoppolo can't go, I just expect the Lions to play with a bit of an urgency, feel that need to rebound so that they don't lose everything they've worked so hard for. And I mean that in the sense that they've turned that culture around. They've gone from a culture that would find ways to lose games to a culture and a team that finds ways to win games. And they're still kind of on the upswing of bringing that around. I think losing a couple of games in a row could really hurt that culture. I think they play with urgency. I think they play with an edge. I think they beat the Raiders, get to 6-2, and continue building towards being one of the best teams in the NFL, if not this year, then in the coming years. this has already been a longer video than expected. I didn't realize until just before recording this that all 32 teams were playing. 16 games should be a fun week. So to recap that full slate of games, I've got the Bills beating the Buccaneers tonight on Thursday Night Football, got the Jets over the Giants, the Jags over the Steelers, got the Eagles sweeping the Commanders, Cowboys over the Rams, Vikings beating the Packers, Falcons beating the Titans, Dolphins over the Pats, Colts beating the Saints, Texans continuing their winning streak against the Panthers, got the Seahawks over the Browns, the Bengals handing the 49ers a 3-game loss streak, got the Chiefs beating the Broncos, the Ravens beating the Cardinals, the Chargers beating the Bears, and the Lions beating the Raiders on Monday Night Football. Let me know what you guys think of these picks. Which game are you most looking forward to watching this weekend? As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.